But for this month, if there was ever anybody in the city of Rogers who needed no introduction, I think Mr. Rusty Turner would be that. He has been editor of the Northwest Arkansas Democrat-Gazette and various other papers, including the Rogers paper, since 1991. So I can't wait to hear what he's got to tell us.
Came in, I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Is that good? Okay. When I came in, I saw the people here. I thought, well, this has got to be the wrong week. They can't be here for me. It must be a really good program for me. But thanks for coming. And I really do enjoy any opportunity to talk about the newspaper, and particularly the history of the newspapers in Northwest Arkansas, which is very rich and very diverse. And I think one of the things you'll find out as we go along, the newspaper business has, the nuts and bolts of the newspaper business didn't change for a long, long time. Hundreds of years, or 100 years basically, the newspaper industry operated the same way. However, the newspapers in Northwest Arkansas, because of the growth, because of all the changes that have been going on in the last century, have changed and adapted. You'll find that lots of the newspapers that were here had different names, they had different ownership, they changed formats over and over again to adapt to the population, to adapt to the demands of the readership, and I think you'll find that some of the things that have happened in the last few years, the same kind of things that were happening 100 years ago in the newspaper business. So from that standpoint, it's not all that different. Now, there's some other things that none of us could have anticipated, say 20 years ago. The advent of digital media, the speed with which information moves now is really remarkable. I'll tell this quick story before I get into the history. I was in my first year as editor at Rogers at the old Northwest Arkansas Morning News in 1991. In October of that year, the governor of our state was a guy named Bill Clinton, and he announced in October of that month he was going to run for president of the United States. Well, that's obviously a huge story in Arkansas, and so we wanted, and his announcement was going to be in Little Rock, a three-hour drive. Well, we decided we wanted to run a color photo of the president's announcement on the front page of our newspaper the next day. That was a huge deal, and then we rarely ran color photos. It had to be a huge news event for us to run a color photo, and so we arranged with the Associated Press to get an image from the press conference that day. And it took, in the technology that we had in 1991, in October of 1991, it took 4.5 hours to get that image transmitted to us from Little Rock. We could have probably driven it back quicker than it took. Of course, the actual processing of a color print in those days also took at least an hour or so. But we got our color photo and we were able to publish on the front page the next day. The Democratic National Convention, at which Governor Clinton was nominated for president, happened the following, I believe, July. And in the meantime, the Associated Press had rolled out its first digital camera. They were $18,000 a piece. And we also wanted a color photo from the Democratic National Convention, but we were very concerned because, that 4.5 hours, the nomination took place at night, 4.5 hours, that was going to put us past the deadline. We weren't sure how we were going to get that photo. Well, AP used its first digital camera at the conventions that year, and we were able to receive that photo within an hour. So in just that matter of 6 or 8 months, the transmission time went from 4.5 hours for a color photo to less than an hour. Of course, now a color photo can be taken and transmitted in a matter of seconds. We have reporters who will go to the scene of an accident or a fire or a police scene, and they will immediately take a photo and tweet that photo. And so within seconds, that photo with our brand is out in the world. And so the world has completely changed in the way we do our business. So with that, that gives you some idea of how quickly we're having to adapt and how fast we have to move our feet in this new media age to keep up. So let me talk a little bit about the history, though. Let me go back and tell you how the 6 newspapers that came together to form the newspaper you get today, the Northwest Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, started. The first newspaper in Northwest Arkansas was the Fayetteville Democrat. It began publication in 1860. And when I say it began publication in 1860, the guy who owned it, a fellow named W.W. Moore, he basically published one whenever he got enough news and advertising together to publish a paper. So it wasn't particularly a weekly or a monthly, it just whenever he was able to get a paper together, he would publish it and distribute it. And that happened right up until about 1861 when he joined the Confederate Army, and the Fayetteville Democrat stopped publication while the owner was serving in the Fayetteville Army, or excuse me, in the Confederate Army. After the Civil War, his sons came to town, and they started the business back up. So in 1868, the Fayetteville Democrat started back up and became a regular publication at that point. So that was the beginning of the newspaper in Fayetteville. The Benton County Democrat was founded in 1886. It was a weekly newspaper in Bentonville, which was, of course, the county seat in Benton County, and it was it became a daily, and it didn't become a daily until 1972. The Springdale News was founded in 1887 by a fellow named John Stafford. He was 18 years old, and he'd worked for W.W. Moore and his family at the Northwest Arkansas Times. Well, he left there, started his own newspaper in Springdale. His first edition had 187 subscribers. And it was a weekly and remained a weekly until the mid-1950s or so. Now, the Rogers Daily Post was founded in 1910. That wasn't the first newspaper in Rogers, but it was the first daily newspaper in Northwest Arkansas. And there had been a number of weekly newspapers in Rogers starting in 1886. I believe the first one was called the Rogers Champion, right after the town was incorporated. It didn't last very long, about 6 months. There was a long weekly newspaper called the Rogers Democrat that lasted many, many years up until the 1940s that competed with the Daily Post in one fashion or another until the mid-40s when the Daily Post absorbed the Rogers Democrat into one company. The Rogers Daily Post had several different owners, several different names over many, many years. It was actually called the Northwest Arkansas Times for about 6 months in the mid-20s because the owner thought, I'm going to turn this into a regional newspaper. Well, that didn't last very long. He found that Rogers was plenty for him, so he changed the name back to the Rogers Daily News, which I'm sure if you're a longtime Rogers resident, you remember the days of the Rogers Daily News. So now we're going to talk about the 2 Little Rock newspapers that are involved up here. The Arkansas Gazette was founded in 1819 at a place called Arkansas Post. That was the original territorial capital. It was a little town on the Arkansas River, not far from the Mississippi River. In 1821, the Arkansas Gazette moved along with its territorial capital to Little Rock upriver a few miles. And it was, the Gazette, when it closed in 1991, up until that point, was the oldest continuously published newspaper west of the Mississippi River. In 1878, the Arkansas Democrat was founded. A number of small papers Reconstruction papers were founded in Little Rock in those days to try to compete with the Gazette, which had been there long established. And the survivor among those weeklies was the Arkansas Democrat. And it published in the afternoons, the Gazette published in the mornings, and they competed head-to-head for quite some time. In 1978, the owner of the Arkansas Democrat, Walter Hussman, who still owns the newspaper, approached the Gazette and asked about starting what's called a joint operating agreement. And that was, in those days, newspapers and competing newspapers in a single town were able to go into to this agreement where basically they would join their advertising and circulation departments, and then they would have competing newsrooms, and they would publish one in the morning, one in the afternoon with competing newsrooms. The Gazette declined. They didn't want to participate in that, and so Mr. Hussman had a choice. He could either, stay in second place and daily afternoon newspapers in those days were beginning to fade, and he had a choice. He could stay there and probably go out of business, or he could move his publication to morning and then take on the bigger, more established Gazette. And that's what he did in 1978. And by 1991, the tide had turned, and Mr. Hussman bought the assets of the Arkansas Gazette, creating the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette in 1991. So I'll go back to Rogers and talk a little bit about what happened with your Rogers Daily News. It continued along the way as an afternoon daily newspaper, published 5 days a week for many years. Had several different owners, was in several different locations in downtown Rogers. Those of you may remember Schaffner Printing Company. The Schaffner family owned the newspaper for a while and operated it for some time. In 1955, I'm going to use a name that I know many of you have heard. You might not associate it with newspapers, but in 1955, a man named Donald W. Reynolds bought the Rogers newspaper. Mr. Reynolds owned a media company founded in Fort Smith called Don Ray Media Group. And at its largest, it owned probably 70 or 80 daily newspapers across Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, California, Hawaii, all across the country. Anyway, Mr. Reynolds bought the Rogers newspaper and put a lot of money into technology, into improving the newspaper, moved it around, bought an offset press, one of the first offset presses in Arkansas. That's the format, the system we use now, in 1962, and installed it in a building in downtown Rogers. And so the Rogers Daily News was one of the first offset press publications in the state, and got rid of those noisy old linotype machines that used melted lead to create the newspaper. That was a much more efficient, much cheaper way to do business, and it was a huge leap forward from a technological standpoint. In 1973, Mr. Reynolds bought the Springdale News from the Sanders family. The Sanders family had purchased the newspaper back in the 40s from the original owners, the Stafford family. And so at that point, Mr. Reynolds had the Rogers and the Springdale newspapers together and operated them separately, but there were some things that the two newspapers worked on together. In the meantime, the Fayetteville Democrat had changed its name to the Northwest Arkansas Times in 1937. I'm going to use another name you may be familiar with. The owner at the time was a woman named Roberta Fulbright. Her son, I'm sure you've heard of, his name was J. William Fulbright. And he was the president of the University of Arkansas. He was a U.S. representative, a U.S. senator, and one of the most powerful U.S. senators during the 1960s, U.S. senator from Arkansas. But anyway, Roberta Fulbright envisioned it someday, 80 years ago, that there'd be a single newspaper to serve the entire region, so she changed the name of the Fayetteville Daily Democrat to the Northwest Arkansas Times. Well, she was a little ahead of her time, didn't quite happen then, but she continued operating the Times, and the subsequent owners continued operating the Times with that name. In 1972, a fellow named Sam Walton and his partner bought the Benton County Democrat. It was a weekly at the time, and it was primarily a way for Mr. Walton to own a printing press so he could print his Walmart circulars at a pretty cheap rate. And that worked out for him quite well, but he also got a little taste of the newspaper business, and so his family owned the Daily Record, the Democrat, which soon became the Daily Democrat, and then eventually the Daily Record. His family owned that up until about 2005. It had an ownership interest in it until about 2005. It also went daily in, I believe it was 1973, and then added a Sunday edition about 1990. Went morning in 1992, kind of joining the Rogers paper as a morning publication. Springdale News went morning in 1990. The Northwest Arkansas Times went morning in about 1993. So at that point, all the newspapers being circulated in Northwest Arkansas at the time were all morning newspapers. There were no longer any afternoons. Let me tell you something kind of interesting about the Rogers newspaper. In 1978, the Rogers newspaper, the Daily News, started a morning edition called the Northwest Arkansas Morning News. And for about 3 years, the Rogers newspaper was the smallest, or Rogers was the smallest community in America served by a newspaper that had 2 editions a day. That was very common in metro dailies in those days, but certainly not in small dailies. And so for 3 years, you could either subscribe to the morning news and get the news in the morning, or you could subscribe to the daily news, get the news in the afternoon. It turned out those newspapers were pretty similar. each day. And so in 1981, the Daily News ceased publication, and the only newspaper that was available in Rogers was the morning edition. And then, of course, subsequently after that, not long, all the afternoon publication newspapers were gone. Let's fast forward a little bit to the present. We talked about the Democrat-Gazette newspaper war in the 90s, in the 80s and 90s. In 1998, Mr. Hussman took the press that he had two in Little Rock. Once he bought out the assets of the Gazette, he had two presses. So he took one of them apart and moved it to that big building in Lowell you see when you go up and down I-49, and started producing a Northwest edition of the Democrat-Gazette, creating competition between basically an edition of the Little Rock newspaper with the local newspapers here. In 1994, you guys may remember that the Rogers and Springdale papers merged, put into one newspaper. So there were essentially three competing entities at that point. There was the Arkansas Democrat, the Northwest edition of the Democrat-Gazette, the Morning News, the combined Rogers and Springdale newspapers, and then there was an alliance between the Times in Fayetteville and the Daily Record in Bentonville. Eventually, the company that Mr. Walton had created to own the newspaper, Community Publishers, bought the Times, and so you have three companies competing against each other. In 2000, the Democrat-Gazette and CPI got together in a partnership, and the Morning News installed a new press, and the competition really ramped up at that point. And those of you who are here in those days probably remember that the size of the number of pages you could get in either newspaper, the rates you could get as far as subscriptions and ads were very low. It was a healthy and vigorous and on some days very frustrating competition for those of us who were involved. I had at one point 109 people in the newsroom just for the Morning News. I was the editor at the Morning News at the time. And I had 109 people. That's an unheard of number for this size market. And that's just us. So if you added, the staff members from the other newspapers that were competing, it was probably well over 200 working reporters, editors, photographers in Northwest Arkansas. As I said, that's an unheard of number. The number of pages we were printing were far more than what most newspapers were printing in those days. And things kind of rocked along that way for a number of years. As you can imagine, none of us were doing very well from a financial basis, but it was a great time for readers because you had great choices, you had great options, you got great newspapers that covered communities like they'd never been covered before. Mr. Reynolds had died in 1992, and the Stevens family of Little Rock, investment bankers in Little Rock, had purchased what was left of his company and eventually changed the name to Stevens Media Group. In about 2000, when the recession hit, it was no longer feasible, or 2008, it was no longer feasible for the newspapers to continue in that competitive vein. And the various owners got together and created, spun off a company that we call Northwest Arkansas Newspapers, which is the ownership group that exists today. All the competitors put their assets in Northwest Arkansas all into one company, including all the weeklies in the area that we'd acquired over the years, and produce the four local dailies: the Daily Record, the Times, the Rogers Morning News, the Springdale Morning News. Produce all of them under one company and one banner. So starting in 2009 in December, when you subscribed to one newspaper, you received your local newspaper plus a copy of the Northwest edition of the Democrat-Gazette. It's a very unusual way to do business. Not very many people were doing that at the time. As a matter of fact, I think we were probably the only ones for most of that period of time who would deliver you two newspapers at once every day. And we did that for about 6 years. And it was obviously a very expensive way to do business. Lots of duplication of efforts, lots of things being done twice and repeated over and over, and it just really didn't make sense to continue doing that. So in 2015, in January, we took the four local dailies, merged those into a single edition, and created the Northwest Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the newspaper you get today. We were able to, we of course had to eliminate some duplication among editors and some of our technical folks and some of our press folks We had to eliminate quite a few positions when we did that, but we were very, very careful to keep the same number of reporters and photographers available on the street. So we've been able to keep our reporting staff and our reporting corps pretty much close to the same as it was in 2009 when we had the original merger. So we're still able to cover our communities in the same way we were covering them. It's just very differently packaged now. You now receive, instead of 2 newspapers in the morning, you receive 1 newspaper with all that content distributed throughout one single newspaper. We still do some zoning. If you live in Benton County, the newspaper you get in the morning is slightly different from the one you get in Washington County. That's by design. We want to make sure that we're still taking care of folks and showing them the most important news in their neighborhood and in their communities, showing them that first. And the same is true in Washington County. So we still are doing a little bit of zoning, but not nearly as much as we were before when we were doing 4 newspapers at a time. That doesn't mean we're providing fewer stories. It just means that we're packaging them in a different way. So. And so that's kind of how we got to where we are. It's been very confusing. We were very hard to do business with in the format after 2009. I don't know if any of you have been advertising customers, but our invoices were so very confusing. You had all different names of newspapers, and your ad bill was all divided up. And I'm surprised we were able to keep as many advertisers as we were, as hard as we were to do business with in those days. So a big part of what we did in 2015 was to simplify that and create a single business entity for you to deal with as an advertising customer. And that's been very successful. And 2015 was the best year we've had in decades in Northwest Arkansas in the newspaper business. Part of that had to do with the those competitive years. It was hard to make money when everybody was competing so hard, and so that had a great deal to do with it. But we feel like we've hit upon a model that really works for us, that really makes us as efficient as we possibly can be, while we can still cover our communities in the way that we know they need to be covered. So we're very confident about the future. 2016 is off to a pretty good start as well, and we feel like we're in pretty good shape. That doesn't mean we've stopped changing. That doesn't mean we've stopped adapting, because in our business, you have to change and you have to adapt. And I know a lot of you, one of the questions you're going to ask in a few minutes is how long am I going to be able to get my print newspaper? When are you going to go online and digital and all that? And I'll try to address that. I think print's going to be around for a little while. The majority of our customers still prefer a print newspaper delivered first thing in the morning. And as long as our customers want that, we're going to deliver that to them in the best way we can. Some of our readers and a lot of people in the community don't want to receive news that way. They want to receive news on their handheld device, their cell phone, or their tablet, or their desktop computer. And so we've had to change our culture within our newsroom, that we're still a journalism organization, we're still a newsroom, we still collect and distribute information that's vital to our community, but we're going to deliver it to you in the way you want. And if you want it printed on newsprint and thrown on your driveway in the mornings, we're going to do that. And if you want it on your phone, we've got an app that you can read the newspaper every day on your phone. We've got a tablet app that you can read the newspaper every day on your tablet. We have a very robust website that you can go to and read the newspaper every day. We are a subscription-based model. We think there's value to the work our newsroom and our editors and reporters do, and so we don't give our news away. I always chuckle when I hear someone say something like, "I don't need a newspaper because I get my news for free." Well, do you really get your news for free? How much did that device cost? How much does your internet access cost? How much, it's not really free to get your news online. And it's certainly not free for us to provide it to you in the form that you see it. One of our big challenges are sites like the Huffington Post. They call themselves aggregators. I call them parasites. What they do is they take headlines from newspapers and news organizations around the country, and they list all those headlines, and if you click on that headline, you might go to a summary of the story that was written by another newspaper, another news organization, or it may take you directly to a website for that other news organization. But all the ad revenue that the Huffington Post is garnering from aggregating all those headlines, none of that comes our way. So it's a little frustrating for us for news aggregation sites to be as successful as they are when essentially they're using our work to benefit them without any compensation coming back our way. So that's a frustrating aspect of our business. The good news about digital, two good things about digital, is that our work is now available to so many more people than it ever was. One of our reporters writes a story today, and it can be viewed, hundreds of thousands of times in a matter of hours because of social media and the speed with which the digital medium delivers information. So that's good news that we're able to get that our messages are now widely available. The other good thing is that it put newspapers back in the breaking news business. Those of you who may remember that when radio came along, or radio and television came along, when their news divisions came along, well, it's going to be the end of newspapers because they're going to be so fast. Well, newspapers were thriving in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. So TV didn't kill newspapers, radio didn't kill newspapers, but it did take us out of the breaking news business. Radio could get to things much more quicker, get information out much quicker. Well, the internet's put us back in that game. And so all of our reporters are equipped with smartphones. They're all equipped, which take pictures. And so all of our reporters, not only can they go out and report and write a newspaper story, but they can take photographs, and they know how to get them out on social media immediately. They know how to do video. They know how to do audio. They know how to present a story in multiple platforms in many, many different ways. So we're able to serve readers who want information, not necessarily printed in first thing in the morning, but they want it right now. They want an alert on their phone that says there's an accident at Wagon Wheel Road in 71B, which there was this morning. It took me forever to get to work. That's part of our changing culture. That's part of what we're doing to adapt to the different digital world. Some of you may ask what's next, and I don't really know that I know. I can tell you that wearables look like to be the next big thing. Anybody know what I mean by a wearable? Yeah. I get my news alerts on my watch now. So, if I get a news alert while I'm talking to you, I can glance at my watch and know that Donald Trump said something crazy or very intelligent, depending on how you feel about him. So watches, glasses, different kinds of apparel, delivering news in certain ways is going to be something that is going to be part of our lives, or maybe not part of our lives, but part of somebody's life at some point. And I have no idea what the next step is after that. We'll just have to adapt to it as we can going forward. What I can tell you is that there's always going to be a place for journalism, whether it's digitally delivered, whether it's delivered on print. Journalism's function is to act as an informant, act as an information source for the community, to act as a watchdog for government and larger institutions, to fully engage in a democracy. You have to have an active, a vibrant, and an independent press, media. And so there's always going to be a place for journalism in a free society. And how we deliver that information and what we collect may change. But what we do, the seeking of the truth, holding government officials accountable for the things that they say and do, making sure that our communities are well informed about the things going on around them in their neighborhoods, there's always going to be a role, and there's always going to be a place for that happening in the community. And the great advantage we have over, anybody can do that now, by the way. I was talking about how our reporters have cell phones and they can take on, anybody can do that. But the advantage we have over someone who's just taking a picture of an accident they happen to see or a scene they happen to come upon is that we have the training, we have the reputation and brand of a news gathering organization that seeks the truth and seeks to get vital and important information out as quickly as possible. And you can trust us. We are We're the people who are publishing your newspaper every day, and it's the same folks who are putting that news out on our digital platforms. So you can trust us, and you know what to expect when someone who's wearing the colors of the Northwest Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, you know what to expect from them when they're out on the scene reporting. So anyway, with that, I'll just open it up for questions that you may have about the newspaper industry, or corrections about anything I may have said that you disagree with. So yes, Sally Ann.
What is your demographics of readers? Is it mainly seniors?
Yes, our demographics are, pretty much the over 55 primarily, usually fairly affluent, but yeah, for our print product, our demographics trend to be older, which you would expect. So it's a real struggle to bring those younger folks into the mix. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to comment that I'm a lover of newspapers.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
No, but we take, of course, your paper, and I take 3 weeklies, Pea Ridge, Bella Vista, and Madison County, because I know you got a good paper, but when you blend it, you lost a lot of local, what's going on among smaller community, and the paper that I love the most is Pea Ridge. Their whole second section is pictures of kids involved in sports at school. It just stands out as this is a small town.
I appreciate you saying that. Pea Ridge is, 2 of the 3 that you named are part of our company. The Pea Ridge newspaper is part of our company, and the Bella Vista paper is part of our company. Madison County is owned separately, but we do print the Madison County record at our place. And I appreciate your comments about the staff there. The staff there is very dedicated, works very hard, and her name is Annette Beard. She's a dynamo. She's terrific. I don't know how she gets everything done. She does a great job. And she's the only paid employee of that newspaper. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
2 questions. Do you give press room tours? And the other is, could you talk a little bit about how advertising scenes classifies real estate, car dealers, and inserts?
Sure. Yeah, we still do press tours. We have 2 press facilities. We have the one that you see on I-49, and that is just a press facility and mailroom. There are no offices there. And then the old Morning News building, which is in the north end of Springdale, just behind the County Line Liquor Store. Everybody in Benton County knows where that is. We have a press facility there as well, and we print the dailies at Lowell, and then we do all our weeklies and our commercial jobs at Springdale. So, and the tours we do at Springdale, because that's, there's a newsroom there, and there's more to see than just the press facility. But yes, we still do those. Changes in advertising, I'm not the expert there because I'm the news guy and they don't let me handle the money, but there's been a significant change, obviously. The biggest first change that we experienced in the digital world was classified. Free classifieds on things like Craigslist really cut into the revenue for things like classified ads, and that bled over into some real estate. Although real estate is still a very, very good sector for us in the newspaper, autos, that sort of thing. We're making a push to get back into auto advertising now. That's been pretty hard to get the last few years. So from a classified standpoint, we've lost a lot of ground there, and I don't think that's ground we're going to be getting back in a big way. As far as inserts and things like that, national companies are being a lot more, they're finding different ways to get those messages out, and so they've taken a lot of money out of inserts and put them into other digital media and getting that out. So they're still using us, and we're still a very effective tool, but they've reduced the amount they use there because they're trying some things in different areas. But most of the time they come back. I won't mention names, but I know we had one advertiser who several months ago said, we're taking our inserts out of the newspaper, and we're going to cut back from 1 a week to twice a month, and within about 6 months they were back to they were able to see that being out of the newspaper had a negative impact on their traffic. So we're still a pretty effective tool when it comes to that sort of thing. What we've got to do is find different ways to advertise, and find the business model won't work digitally. The business model for newspapers was that we're going to deliver you news and information, and we're going to deliver ad messages for businesses to you, and we're going to deliver it to you first thing in the morning. And what the advertisers pay us for those ad messages is going to be 80%, 90, 85% of the revenue that we get, because those ads were effective, and they were. Some people thought of them expensive, but they were very effective tools. Ads online are not nearly as effective. They're easier to ignore, they're easy to block, they're easy to get away from. People don't respond the way they do to a print ad. And so those ads, we want to sell ads online too, but those ads don't have the impact, so they're not nearly as effective, and we can't charge as much for them. So an eyeball in print is way more valuable than an eyeball online. So we're not going to be able to just take our business model and slide it over to the digital world. It's not going to work. So we're looking for different ways to make revenue. We've started a digital advertising agency within our company called One to One, and basically those folks they'll package advertising for you, digital, print, all that kind of stuff. We'll also do reputation management for you. We'll do search engine optimization for you. We'll help you do. We'll help you set up websites. We'll help you set up mobile apps and that sort of thing. So that's one way we can take our expertise into a different area and generate different revenue, generate new revenue. So I think you'll see newspaper companies getting into different kinds of business that way. So did that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, sir.
One of the things that I find interesting now is there's so many local options. You've got the new magazines that started, Celebrate, Arkansas.
Yeah.
They're all telling me a little bit about what they think is important that I need to know about so I can plan it for the next month. You got the free weekly that in Arkansas.
Yeah, which we know, by the way.
And I like that
Yeah.
because it's got some
Yeah.
different stuff in it, but it also kind of lists out everything going on. Then on Friday, you've got your insert, which kind of does that, but it tells you everything that's going on right now. And I keep thinking, when are we going to get something that talks about what's going on a month in advance so we can kind of figure out what, by the time I read it, if I don't read my paper first thing Friday morning, I may miss something they've got a full page ad, and I'm thinking, what a waste.
Yeah, so when you say a month in advance, you're talking as far as leisure activities, entertainment.
Do you own that company out of Tulsa that started?
No, currently,
in
no, we don't have anything to do with
Well,
currently.
Northwest, they've started that too. Their
Yeah.
only issue is by the time it shows up on the newsstands or in the free stores where you pick it up, half the month's gone.
Well, that's part of the problem with doing quarterly and monthly entertainment type thing. If you travel much and you go to a hotel and there's the magazine about just went with the family to Oklahoma City, and I picked up the Oklahoma City magazine that was in the hotel room there, and 3/4 of the things in it had already happened.
Right.
So
I just think that's still a market that it's as a consumer, and I'm lucky now I have time to just fill my days with things like this, which are great. But finding out when all those things are going on, it's kind of like, I see Sally at one thing, she tells me to come over and see this, it's pretty good. It's all word of mouth, or you're picking it up from 20 different places. I'm just telling you.
Yeah.
If I were in your business, I think the first person that gets to that, and we've got all these people now that are retired that have all this time that want to be engaged in things. I think it's a big opportunity, and whoever does that best is going to win. Because right now, we're getting it from a lot of different places, and none of them are worth a hoot.
I would argue with that, but okay.
Totally,
it's
it's totally inclusive for the whole.
Yeah.
In advance. It's like my church, they publish a monthly calendar. Finally got them to give me the next month when they give me this month, just so I can see what's coming.
So,
Nice plan.
yes, excuse me, when you say they're not worth a hoot, is that because of the timeliness or other things as well?
I think it's primarily the timeliness because they're talking about something that's happening this weekend and you don't necessarily see it till Friday evening. So, I'm just saying.
Well, you need to read the newspaper Friday morning.
I understand, but I'm just thinking it's an opportunity.
Yeah. Okay.
Whoever can capture local events and get that in a format, even on a web. Now, that's something that'd be easy to put on the
Yeah.
website.
We actually have a calendar function where those things show up. What we had trouble with is getting, it'll scrape events, but it's far from comprehensive. And so getting folks to utilize that. But we do have a calendar function where you can see things that, as long as we've been able to scrape it off someone else's website, or we've been able to put it there ourselves, or get someone to submit it to us online. So we do have a calendar function that intends to do that, but it hasn't taken off yet, hasn't quite gotten to the comprehensive stage yet.
Well, I know,
Yeah.
it's dependent upon when the person giving the event gets you the information
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah, that's true. But I do think you make a good point. There's certainly an opportunity as far as, there are more than 500,000 people in this area now, so.
And there's so much going on.
And there's a lot going on. There
There's
certainly
a
is.
lot going on.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
because, well, I work at Hobbs, and I know that those emails go to you at least 10 days before the event.
Yeah,
And we get 3
I-
lines
yeah.
on Friday morning.
yeah.
3 little lines.
I wish everyone would do 10 days. Not everyone does, sometimes.
Well, it doesn't do any good.
Yeah.
Because you're not putting anything in.
Well,
other than
there are,
Hobbs.
three lines, but there are, as you said, hundreds and hundreds of things going on, so.
I've got another question
Mhm.
about your delivery people.
Mhm.
Do you have any kind of a yearly contest of who was the best, so they get some kind of a reward? I've got the best there is. At 4
So-
o'clock, I can open up my door and there he is,
Well,
delivery.
the-
4 o'clock in the
the
morning.
first thing-
The presses are
yeah.
out.
The first thing I'll tell you is that carrier is the hardest job in our business, and it is really, really tough. It's 7 days a week, the weather doesn't matter, it's a really tough job.
He beat the post lady.
Yeah, well,
He
yeah.
delivered when we had the ice storm,
So-
she didn't.
However, those are, all those folks who deliver the newspaper are independent contractors, so they're not employees, so we have a contract with them that they're gonna deliver a certain number of newspapers within a certain parameter at a certain rate. And if they are successful in doing that, then we continue with them as a contractor, and it works out pretty well for both of us. It's not a full-time job for very many of them. It's kind of a supplemental income for most of them. So, but it is a tough
Sometimes
job.
special recognition.
And I do know that the circulation department does have contests. They do have circulation contests. They do. They are awarded bonuses and points based on performance if they have few complaints and that sort of thing. So I know that they do rewards the carriers in that way. But I've been out on a couple of routes with some carriers, and it is a tough job. And I can't imagine what it's like when there's snow on the ground. It's really difficult. By the way, next time it snows, which may be next year, kind of keep that in mind. If we're a few minutes late, give us a break. We're trying to get to you. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, I'm going to praise the people.
Well, God bless you. Thank you.
I have called several times, and I lived at the bottom of a steep hill and did not receive a newspaper. I want to praise the people at the newspaper that I called, because always within 1 hour, hour and a half, I had a newspaper and an apology at my front door. And I'm like you, I think the carriers have a really hard job, I can't imagine. But I have another question for you. I've noticed there seems to be, and this may be my perception, a lot more articles about Bentonville than Rogers in the newspaper. Maybe we're so good that there's never anything to report, I don't know. I did notice that the mayor was going to hire a public relations person. Can we expect more articles in the paper from that?
I don't know that hiring of a PR person is going to increase the number of stories in the newspaper, because we usually don't let PR people decide what we print. So public relations folks are fine, they come in handy, but their goals are different than our goals. So their goal is to get something in the newspaper that's positive all the time, no matter what, and that's not necessarily our goal. We want to be truthful, not necessarily positive. So So I don't know the answer to that. A couple of things I can say is that from a school district standpoint, there have been a lot more stories about the Bentonville School District in the last 6-8 months because there's been a lot more conflict there than there has been in Rogers. And if you're a Rogers patron, I see that as a good sign. But sometimes, I think if you look at it from that perspective, you can kind of understand how those things, how that works. I'm glad you said that. I'll tell a funny story. Back when I first got to Rogers in 1991 as the editor of the Morning News, we didn't have a Saturday edition. We published Monday through Friday, and then we skipped Saturday, and then we had a Sunday edition. And we had a rule that if we had local stories for that Sunday edition, we didn't want an all-wire front page on Sunday morning. So if we had local stories, we were going to do everything we could to get those stories on the front page. In those days, the Bentonville Planning Commission met on Friday afternoons. And so every time the Bentonville Planning Commission met, they were always on the front page of the Sunday paper in Rogers. For that reason, it was the first chance we'd had to report that. And I can't tell you the number of calls I took from Rogers residents saying, "Why are you always putting that Bentonville Planning Commission on the front page?" And it was a function of the timing. It just, those are things that make perfect sense to us in the newspaper business. And then, someone who's looking at the newspaper at home on a Sunday morning, they don't think of that. And why would they? So that's, sometimes when you see those things, it's a function of timing. Sometimes you see those things as a function of what's going on. Sometimes we need to do a better job.
Rusty,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have a complaint just right there.
Mhm.
I'm on the Rogers Planning Commission, and when it lists, all
Mhm.
Rogers is never listed. City Council or the Planning Commission is left off. And I've heard more people say,
Yeah.
how come I didn't?
That's surprising to hear because I saw it just the other day. But I'll look into that and see what the problem is. So, yes, ma'am.
I want to thank you for doing the health inspections, and I hope you never stop.
Oh, thank you.
And
That-
also the police records, the little records.
Yeah, the police calls, yep. The health department reports, that's an interesting, we started those a few years ago, and that's proved to be one of the most popular things that we've had. So popular to the point that if you're interested online at all, we now archive those and make them searchable by restaurant. So you can go onto our website and search by restaurant to see the history of those health those health inspections are. And I appreciate you saying that. That's a simple thing, but it's such an important thing because it serves part of our watchdog purpose, helping you be informed about things that are important to you. So, yes, ma'am.
I have a demographics question. We've got a significant Latino population in this town, and I don't know who owns the Spanish language papers or.
We do.
Okay.
There's one called La Prensa Libras, and we own it.
But when I read the Spanish papers and I read the English language papers, it's not that they're not in the same town, they're not in the same world, it seems to me, what's going on.
I don't read Spanish, so I can't.
Is that separate editorial?
Yeah, well, the editor for our Spanish language newspaper sits about 200 feet from my desk. So, and I see him on a regular basis, and we talk he and I meet every Friday, and we talk about the stories he's working on. I know Jose uses a lot of our story, translates a lot of English stories, and uses them. So, I'm not sure which newspaper you're looking at that is so different. There's one called Ola, Arkansas, that is out of Little Rock, and sometimes it's here and sometimes it's not. But it is, frankly, it's more of a promotional tool for the owner than it is a newspaper. So, but if there's another one I'm not aware of. So I'm going here than you, sir. Yes, sir.
One place you can be TV and radio, of course, is investigative reporting. And you guys did I thought, a great job with the Supreme Court and the money flowing.
Yeah, that was a great experience.
Is the amount of your budget or whatever devoted to investigative reporting having to shrink, or is this
the way at our size, in our size shop, basically investigative or enterprise reporting has to be done sort of in the cracks. I'm afraid I don't. If you've seen the movie Spotlight, I don't have a 4-person Spotlight team that can spend a year working on a story. I wish I did. We do have one reporter, Doug Thompson, who's primarily a political reporter and does a lot of our enterprise work. And so we were able to break him away to do some of those larger term stories. So it hasn't really shrunk, but it's not nearly as big as I'd like for it to be. I think there's a lot of opportunity there if we could get some resources dedicated to that.
Great
He's
report.
great.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. He's very talented. Yes.
Yeah, concerning these Spanish-speaking newspapers, I've been wondering for some time, how is it that those papers go free? Those are free, and we pay for ours. Not only that, but our expenses have risen a bit. Can you explain that?
Well, part of it is that it's that's in that community. That's a fairly common way to distribute newspapers. Yes.
Well, we'd like it to be.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I can get
Yeah.
used to that right
Yeah. It also has to, it's a weekly, and so it's very much more expensive per piece to deliver a weekly that way.
Do a weekly for us too.
Yeah. Do you want your newspaper once a week? I don't know. I would think you'd want it every day.
At least
So,
don't raise ours while giving another demographic free.
well, it's not about giving a demographic free. It's about what's the best way to get that information.
But it is.
Circulated. Yeah. So. Yes.
Obviously, a free press is so important for democracy. I'm noticing that in TV, the days of Brinkley, Huntley, and Cronkite are over as far as the big stations are going propaganda. So from your written point of view, do you feel any pressures for political bias from owners or advertisers, or can we say the Democrat-Gazette is giving us an unbiased view of what is going on, or is it slanted one way or the other?
I can tell you this. I know that our Waco owner, Mr. Husband, is very dedicated to the idea of an independent newsroom. And so when it comes to daily coverage, when it comes to making assignments and how we go about doing our jobs in the newsroom, he stays very, very clear of those sorts of decisions and leaves them to the newsroom. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. And I think our newsroom's lucky and our readership is lucky because we have an owner who's dedicated to editorial independence. Now, when he gets to the editorial page, he has a little more influence there because he's the owner. But what happens on the editorial page does not influence what happens in the daily newspaper. So, other questions? Oh, and you asked if I feel any pressure. No, I don't. Fortunately, I do not. Most of the pressure I feel is competitive pressure, and also some budget pressure to make sure I'm not spending more money than I'm supposed to. So, yes.
I just want to say I took a 6-week vacation a couple of years ago, and everywhere I stopped, I bought a newspaper. But I was really happy to get back to reading.
And I always encourage people to do that. I occasionally get that hysterical phone call from, oh, this newspaper, it's nothing compared to what it was, and it's so much smaller. It's terrible, it's awful, how can you do it? And I always suggest, I say, next time you travel to a comparably sized city or a larger city, go buy the local newspaper. You'll pay more, and you'll get fewer pages
It's
and
funny
fewer
when
stories.
you talk about paying more, because I have to admit, when I got the bill the last time or the time before, I went, oh, that's about the biggest increase percentage-wise. I couldn't believe it. I was a little concerned, frankly, because I thought, well, this may take out 20% of your readers that are going to move away, and then that's going to leave us 80% paying even more. So that was a concern, and it probably should be.
I thought I might get to 1 o'clock without that question, but I guess not. So, one of the things that's happened, have our rates gone up? You bet, they've gone way up. And part of that was that they were so depressed through the newspaper war. We were selling subscriptions sometimes at $20 a year, sometimes at $6, $7 a month. And you go to any other comparably sized market, and you're you were paying way more than that. So part of that was that our readership was accustomed to extremely low circulation rates and lots of competitive discounts and that sort of thing. Generally in a newspaper model, what you pay for circulation pays for delivery, nothing else. That because our ad rates and our ad revenue has begun to change and come down, we've had to get a little bit more revenue out of circulation, which is one of the reasons that ad rates. So, we're adjusting the ad rates up to where they really ought to have been. And we're also having to, ask our readers to contribute a little bit more to our bottom line so we can keep doing what we're doing because ad rates have gone down. At the same time, we're not just, depending on that, we're still looking at different revenue sources. We're still trying to build on what we did. We're trying to get back in the auto business. There are lots of things that we can do to build that revenue back up. But circulation has to be a larger percentage now of our total revenue than it was before. A lot of people didn't realize that. A lot of people thought circulation was a driving revenue source, and it really wasn't. It basically paid for delivery, and that was it. Yes?
Talk about circulation. Because you've moved out of Rogers and Bentonville and Siloam Springs and all those places.
Haven't moved out of Siloam Springs.
Well, where can we go besides Springdale to get an extra copy of the newspaper if there's an article in there that we want to send other articles to?
Well, one of the things we still have offices in Siloam Springs. We still have an office in Springdale. We still have one in Fayetteville, and we also have an office lease space in Bella Vista. One of the things that happened when we did the merger in 2009, we were a newspaper company with 16 different pieces of property, either leased or owned, and that's a heck of a lot of overhead. So we've been selling some of our real estate because we just don't need that much anymore. As far as reporters needing a home base to operate from, they're so independent now. They're so able to, a reporter can spend all day in Rogers. A Rogers reporter, and Teresa often does spend all day in Rogers without ever coming to Springdale, but she can file any story, any photo from just about anywhere. So with the technology that we have, so the need for a home base in Rogers is for reporters just doesn't necessarily compute anymore.
But just to buy an extra copy.
Well, and from that, what you're talking about, that customer service, unfortunately. We're consolidating.
We can't set up an agreement with the Chamber of Commerce where we could go buy extra copies.
We haven't discussed that with them. That's certainly a possibility. But you can go, almost any convenience store sells our newspaper on our off of a rack in Rogers. Every Walmart has our newspaper, so you can go in and get one there. So we still have plenty of places to buy a newspaper in Rogers. So.
Yes.
Only once in the last 5 years have I not been able to find a copy of a newspaper.
Yeah. Now, you may not see racks out very much anymore, and the tendencies to go away from racks. The convenience stores, the grocery stores, they don't want to sell them out of racks anymore. They want you to come into the store to buy them. Right. So when you, plus, with the price.
You have to drive your car and go in the store.
Yeah. So plus, with the price no longer is just change. It's $1 or $2. Not everybody's got 4 quarters or 8 quarters hanging around. So the newspaper boxes, the ones we have, aren't particularly effective anymore. So, but there are plenty of places to buy an extra copy or several extra copies of the newspaper in all our communities.
You can also go online and you can just get a copy of that article and email it to somebody.
If you're a subscriber, yes, you can.
If you're prescribed.
Yeah.
The only thing that makes that challenge sometimes is if it's an article in the Northwest edition. I have a heck of a time getting to it, but eventually I'm assuming that the website will continue to improve.
Yeah.
But that's a great way to do it, and it's kind of fun to send yourself an email just like on this current campaign. I've never seen anything like this, so I can't wait to see where we land in November and what we were saying now. It's kind of fun to keep a file.
One of the challenges we hear from readers around the state, particularly our lawmakers, when they go to Little Rock for a session, is that your subscription to the Northwest edition of the Democrat doesn't get you onto the Arkansas Democrat Gazette site out of Little Rock. So they're two separate newspapers, two separate subscriptions, and that frustrates some of our lawmakers. I figure they can afford the extra subscription. So.
They gave themselves a nice rate.
Yeah, that's right. They gave themselves.
They get some dark money.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question.
And this is probably a poor thank you to Mr. Turner for coming out and speaking, but I would like to point out that as long as they're putting out a print paper, your public library will have a subscription. You can always come here and make a copy or read the paper here. And that's what we do.
And I'm glad, and thank you for doing that. We greatly appreciate it. I appreciate the questions. Those of you who are subscribers, I appreciate your business. We value every single one of you, let me tell you. It is it's a challenging business these days, but I still have a great time going to work every day. I get to do, I get to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. I get to know a little bit about a lot of different things, and that's really entertaining for me and really fun. And on a serious note, what we do is really, really important. And you may not think we do a great job at it, but journalism and the function it serves in a free society is really, really important. And today, more than any time in our history, we need to remember the value of a free and independent press. When you have I'm going to say this. When you have a major presidential candidate who advocates doing something about the First Amendment because he doesn't like the press, that's trouble. That's serious trouble. So please keep that in mind, and thank you again for your attention. Thank you for your business, and yeah, I'll hang around for a few minutes if you have any questions. So.